We call very few ages in human history golden. It is a word we reserve for those rare moments when a civilization seems to catch fire all at once, when art and science and philosophy rise together to heights that echo for 1,000 years. Ancient Greece had such a moment. So did Renaissance Italy. And so, long before either was remembered, did a single empire in ancient India. In the space of a few generations, this empire gave the world the number that underlies all of modern mathematics. Its astronomers looked at the night sky and declared correctly that the earth was spinning. Its poets wrote plays still performed today. Its sculptors carved images of such serene beauty that they became the template for how an entire religion would picture the divine. And its cities were so prosperous, so peaceful, that a traveler from distant China walked across the whole of it and marveled that he could journey for months without fear. This was the Gupta Empire, the age that India itself would forever remember as its golden one. And yet, like every golden age, it carried within it the seeds of its own ending. For all its brilliance, it would vanish in little more than 2 centuries, swept away by a storm of horsemen from the north. So how did this astonishing flowering begin? What did it truly achieve? And why, when a civilization reaches such a peak, can it still fall? To find the answer, we must travel back more than 1,600 years to the plains of northern India, and to a family whose very name has puzzled historians ever since. The empire begins, fittingly, in some obscurity. In the early years of the 4th century of our era, northern India was a patchwork of small kingdoms, the great days of the Maurya's centuries behind it. Then, from the region of Magadha, the same ancient heartland that had birthed the first Indian empire, a new dynasty began to rise. Its founder took the throne around the year 320. And here history plays a strange trick, because his name was Chandragupta. Not the Chandragupta who had founded the Maurya Empire 600 years earlier, but a new man entirely, Chandragupta I of the Gupta line. He was shrewd. Through a carefully arranged marriage to a princess of the powerful Likshavi people, he bound their strength to his own and transformed a modest kingdom into the foundation of an empire. But it was his son who would turn that foundation into a colossus. His name was Samudragupta, and he was one of the most formidable rulers India ever produced. We know a remarkable amount about him because he had his deeds inscribed on an ancient stone pillar, one that had stood since the days of Ashoka himself, adding his own record beneath the Emperor of Peace who had come before. In flowing verse composed by his court poet, the inscription lists a breathtaking career of conquest. He marched across northern India, uprooting rival kings and absorbing their territories. He swept south along the eastern coast, defeating a long line of kingdoms, then, remarkably, restoring many of their rulers as subordinates rather than destroying them. Distant powers sent him tribute and sought his friendship. By the end of his reign, the Gupta writ ran across almost the whole of northern India. And yet, Samudragupta was far more than a warlord. The same coins that show him wielding weapons show him, on their reverse, seated calmly, playing a stringed instrument called the veena. Here was a conqueror who was also a musician and a poet, a man who embodied an ideal the Guptas prized above all, the union of power and refinement, of the sword and the arts. There is a detail worth pausing on because it reveals the soul of these rulers. Samudragupta revived an ancient and magnificent royal rite, the horse sacrifice, an enormously expensive ceremony that a king could perform only if he was confident. No rival dared challenge him. He even struck special gold coins to commemorate it. Yet this same warrior king filled his court with scholars and artists, and took pride in being called a poet. The Guptas understood something that many conquerors never grasp, that an empire is not remembered for the land it seizes, but for the civilization it nurtures. Gold and grain filled their treasuries, and they spent that wealth not only on armies, but on beauty, learning, and faith. It was under his son, though, that the Golden Age reached its full and dazzling noon. Chandragupta II came to the throne around the year 375 and took the title Vikramaditya, meaning something like son of valor. He completed what his father had begun, crushing the last great rival power in the West, a dynasty of foreign origin that had ruled the rich lands toward the Arabian Sea for centuries. With their defeat, the Gupta Empire finally touched the Western Ocean, gaining control of the lucrative ports that traded with the wider world. Wealth flowed in, and with that wealth, the emperor did something that would define his legacy. Far more than any battle, he gathered around his court the finest minds of the age. Among them, tradition tells us, shone 9 brilliant figures remembered as the 9 gems. Whether they all truly served at once, or whether later ages simply gathered India's greatest talents under one legendary court, the symbol is what matters. And the brightest of these gems was a poet named Kalidasa. To this day, he is regarded as the greatest writer in the entire history of the Sanskrit language, the Shakespeare of ancient India. His plays and poems, with their exquisite imagery of longing, love, and the natural world, were not crude entertainments. They were works of extraordinary sophistication, studied and performed and loved for the 15 centuries since. That such a writer could flourish tells us everything about the world the Guptas built, a world with the peace, the wealth, and the confidence to treasure beauty for its own sake. But it is in the sciences that the Gupta Golden Age truly changed the course of human history in ways that touch every single person alive today. For it was in this era that Indian mathematicians perfected an idea so simple and so powerful that our entire modern world rests upon it, the idea of zero. Other cultures had used placeholders and gaps, but it was in India, in these centuries, that zero came to be treated as a number in its own right, a thing you could calculate with, combined with the decimal place value system, where the position of a digit determines its value. This gave humanity the number system we all use now, those very numerals, which would travel west through the Arab world to Europe and be called, mistakenly, Arabic numerals were born here. Every calculation, every equation, every line of computer code that runs our civilization is built upon this foundation. It is no exaggeration to say that the modern world learned to count from ancient India, and the genius did not stop at mathematics. This same age produced an astronomer named Aryabhata, who at the age of just 23 wrote a treatise that reads, in places, like a message from the future. He calculated the value of pi to a stunning accuracy. He understood that the moon and planets shine by reflected sunlight. And most astonishingly of all, he proposed that the Earth is not the still center of the universe, but a sphere that spins upon its own axis, turning each day beneath the stars. He explained that the apparent motion of the heavens was an illusion, caused by the rotation of the ground beneath our feet. This was 1,000 years before Copernicus would trouble Europe with similar ideas. In the quiet study of a scholar in Gupta India, humanity took one of its boldest steps toward understanding its true place in the cosmos. This was also an age that learned to heal. The great medical traditions of India, gathered and refined in texts studied during these centuries, described hundreds of surgical procedures and instruments, the setting of bones, the treatment of wounds, even early forms of reconstructive surgery to rebuild a damaged nose, techniques that would astonish European doctors when they encountered them more than 1,000 years later. Physicians cataloged diseases and remedies with careful patient observation, and knowledge itself became something to be housed and honored. It was under the Gupta kings that the foundations were laid for what would become the greatest university of the ancient world. At Nalanda, a vast monastic center of learning where, in the centuries that followed, thousands of students from across Asia would come to study logic, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy, in halls that stretched for acres. The Guptas did not merely produce genius. They built a civilization that gathered it, taught it, and passed it on. To walk through this empire at its height was to see a civilization utterly sure of itself. We do not have to imagine it, because a witness left us his account. A Chinese Buddhist monk named Faxian traveled across northern India in these years, seeking sacred texts, and he wrote down what he saw. He described a land of peace and plenty. The people, he reported, were prosperous and content. Crime was rare, and punishments were mild. Charitable rest houses and hospitals cared for travelers and the sick. He could journey the length of the empire, he marveled, in safety. For a man from a distant and often turbulent world, Gupta India seemed almost a dream of good government, a place where an ordinary person could simply live in peace. Beneath this good government, the very spirit of India was being reshaped. This was the age in which classical Hindu culture took the form we would recognize today. The great epics and sacred stories were given their lasting shape. Temples of stone began to rise, where before there had been only simpler shrines, and the gods, Vishnu and Shiva, took their central place in the devotion of millions. Buddhism and Jainism still flourished alongside them, and the Gupta rulers, though devoted Hindus themselves, largely allowed all faiths to thrive. It was a rare and fertile balance, a society confident enough in its own beliefs to make room for others. And out of that openness came an explosion of creativity in every field at once, and that peace and wealth poured out into breathtaking art. In the rock-cut caves at a place called Ajanta, artists of this era painted the walls with murals of such grace and humanity that they are counted among the greatest paintings of the ancient world, their colors glowing in the darkness of the caves for over 1,000 years. Sculptors working in the Gupta style created images of the Buddha and the Hindu gods so balanced, so serene, so perfectly poised between the human and the divine, that they set the standard for religious art across much of Asia for centuries to come. And near their capital rose a monument that still defies explanation, a towering column of iron, 7 meters tall, forged with such purity that in over 1,500 years, through monsoon after monsoon, it has scarcely rusted at all. It stands to this day, a silent testament to a mastery of metalwork the world would not match for many centuries. So here was a civilization at the very summit of human achievement, peaceful, prosperous, brilliant in art, and unrivaled in science. It seemed the very definition of a lasting golden age. And yet, even as Chandragupta, the second successors ruled over this splendor, a shadow was gathering far to the north, beyond the mountains. On the great grasslands of Central Asia, a fierce and nomadic people were on the move, part of the same vast wave of horse-riding warriors that was, in these very centuries, tearing apart the Roman Empire on the far side of the world. In India, they were known as the Hunas, and in the middle of the 5th century, they came pouring through the mountain passes into the rich and peaceful lands of the Guptas. The empire did not fall at once. A Gupta ruler named Chandragupta rose to meet the threat, and in fierce fighting, he managed to hurl the invaders back, defending his people and preserving the empire for a time. But the cost was staggering. War on this scale was ruinously expensive. The treasury, once overflowing, was drained to pay for armies and defenses. The quality of the coinage declined, a sure sign of an empire under financial strain. And the Hunas did not give up. Wave after wave they came, and though they were resisted, each assault bled the empire further. The long peace that had made the golden age possible was shattered. And once that peace was gone, the delicate machinery of the Gupta state began to break down. For the empire had always been held together, as much by prestige and alliance as by brute force. As the central power weakened under the endless strain of invasion, the local governors and subordinate kings, who had once bowed to the Guptas, began to assert their independence. Province by province, the great empire came apart, fragmenting back into the very patchwork of smaller kingdoms from which it had risen. By the middle of the 6th century, little more than 200 years after Chandragupta I had laid its foundations, the Gupta Empire had effectively ceased to exist. The Golden Age was over, and yet to call it simply an ending would be to miss the point entirely. Because unlike a city that is burned or a people who are scattered, the true achievements of the Gupta age could not be destroyed by any army of horsemen. The invaders could sack a treasury, but they could not uninvent the zero. They could burn a palace, but they could not erase the knowledge that the earth turns upon its axis. The poems of Kalidasa were already copied and beloved across the land. The serene face of the Gupta Buddha was already spreading along the trade roads to China, to Southeast Asia, to Japan. The mathematics born in this age would travel westward and, centuries later, ignite the scientific awakening of the entire world. The Gupta Empire fell, but almost everything that made it golden survived, woven so deeply into human civilization that we use it every single day without ever knowing its name. So consider, at the last, what a golden age really is. It is not a thing of walls and armies, of borders that can be defended forever. Those always fall. It is a moment when human beings, freed for a while from fear and want, reach as high as they possibly can and create things so true and so beautiful that they outlast the very empire that made them. The Gupta kings could not hold back the horsemen forever. No one ever can. But in their brief and brilliant noon, they gave humanity gifts that no invasion could ever take back. The empire is dust. The zero remains. And perhaps that is the truest measure of greatness, not how long a kingdom endures, but how much of its light still reaches us, long after the kingdom itself is gone. If you would like to keep traveling with us through the forgotten corners of the human past, stay a while longer and let the next story begin.